Hey, look at that shiny gold medal. Bet he bought it at a toy store. Laughs erupted from the group of youths in blazing red t-shirts. One of them craned his neck, pointing at the threadbare uniform of an old man sitting alone at the edge of the festival. Beside him hung a crudely scrawled sign, U.S. Navy Veteran, Operation Desert Storm, 1970. Another kid joined in, clapping his hands. That old geezer must think he's an action movie hero. Who'd believe that glittery thing is real? The old man didn't respond. He only raised a trembling hand to grasp the medal resting on his chest, then bowed his head, his eyes lost in a fathomless void of memory. Passers-by averted their gazes. The hushed whispers slowly faded as he stood and gathered up his keepsakes. And then, just 1 hour later, the waters trembled. A naval fleet sailed into the festival. The ship's commander, once the teenage student who'd stood beside this old man, stepped onto the stage, revealing a secret that left the entire square in stunned silence. What is powerful enough to make an entire fleet speak up for one man? Subscribe to Veteran Best Stories to follow a tale you will never forget. Rockshore, Texas. A town where sunlight pours over sandy shores and seagulls circle the sky in brilliant arcs. The Summer Coastal Festival has long been the pride of the region. Each June, as ocean breezes carry salt and surf, locals and thousands of visitors converge on this small town to immerse themselves in days filled with music, food, and color. Along the streets near the harbor, vendor booths stand shoulder to shoulder, resplendent like a shimmering ribbon. From crispy fried shrimp and buttery grilled corn to the wail of a harmonica from a street band, every sound and scent melds into a vivid scene found nowhere else. Yet, amid that lively cacophony, in a tucked-away corner near the central Memorial Plaza, where few bother to glance, a weathered wooden table appears, silent and unassuming, as though it were the relic of a bygone era. The table bears no paint or ornate decoration, only cracks worn by time, the gray salted grain of driftwood. Seated behind that table is Mr. Marcus Rowe, 76 years old. His frame is thin, shoulders slightly stooped from the years, but his eyes remain bright and sharp as they were when he wore a Navy insignia. He once commanded communications, encoding messages, decoding secrets, and coordinating strategies during the covert rescue operation in the Gulf in 1970, an assignment classified for decades in government archives. On the table, he displays a few black and white photographs, yellowed with age, one capturing a group of service members pulling a wounded civilian aboard a ship, another showing the command vessel cutting through storm-tossed seas, its spotlight piercing the mist. Rusted steel artifacts, binoculars, a compass, an identification tag, are laid out neatly as if in a private exhibit with no invitations issued. Most striking among them is a Medal of Honor mounted on a fading gray-blue ribbon, lying silently as proof of a past the government once denied. But today's festival has changed. Reverence for those old values has given way to neon lights and TikTok dances. Amid the screeching EDM, non-stop promotional announcements, and crowds jostling for selfies with social media stars, the sight of an elderly man seated at a simple wooden table seems as out of place as a stray page from history blown into a digital age. Passers-by ignore him as they would an outdated museum piece. Pitiful, but unnecessary. Children tug their parents toward the playground. Teenagers cluster around the ice cream stalls. Not a soul glances his way. Only he sits there, occasionally brushing a fingertip across the edge of a photograph, straightening a wooden frame twisted by the wind. Then, a group of young people approaches. Giggles erupt when one of them thrusts out his phone. They pay no heed to the medal or the history. They only see a decrepit old man who must be a perfect comedic prop. One guy in a backwards cap, clutching a neon blue slushie, switches on his live stream and thrusts the camera close to Mr. Rowe's face. In a mocking tone, he says, "Hey everyone, we found a living history cosplay at the Rockshore Festival. Hollywood production value or what?" Laughter ripples through his friends. Another teen snatches a quick selfie beside Mr. Rowe, flashing a mock military salute as if it were the ultimate joke. Mr. Rowe says nothing. He only looks down, quietly drawing his hands inward, as if trying to shrink himself away from the world's gaze. The silence in his eyes is not shame. It is a soul-crushing disappointment. Cold contempt does not come from the ocean breeze, but from a generation that no longer knows what lies beneath its feet. No one intervenes. No one steps forward to defend him. The crowd continues laughing, moving on as if nothing has happened. And he, once a naval commander who led a fleet offshore, who rescued dozens amid a deadly storm, who shaped the course of defense history without ever demanding praise, bows his head, gathering up each artifact as if collecting the shattered fragments of his dignity. The glass on a picture frame falls, shattering at the corner. He does not flinch. He simply bends to pick it up, gently wiping the shards with an old handkerchief. Each motion is slow, as though touching the broken pieces of a forgotten memory. His hand trembles, less from age than from something deeper, the pain of silence, the sense of being adrift in a society that no longer listens, no longer sees, no longer remembers. And beneath the dazzling lights of the main stage, where a DJ's call to the next performance pounds, the old man closes the wooden box, as though sealing away a life he once believed needed only steadfast loyalty and silence. But here, in the very town he fought to protect, that is a sentiment that no longer holds meaning. Marcus sat silently by the sea, completely cut off from the noise and glittering lights of the festival behind him. The excited shouts of the crowd had faded to a distant echo, swallowed by the steady rhythm of waves lapping the shore. Before him, the ocean stretched out like a silver mirror, glittering in the last rays of daylight sinking toward the horizon. His hand remained clasped around the small wooden box, an object he carried as if, the moment he let go, it would vanish into the sand, along with all the years that had passed unnoticed. The wooden box was faded, its hinges rusted, its surface scratched by time, but inside, the metal lay unblemished, just as Marcus's heart still beat for a memory that no one remembered. Not because he needed recognition or praise, not because he desired applause. He kept it because it was the only remnant of a mission he had never spoken of, not from fear, but because he believed that doing the right thing was enough to live by, enough to sleep peacefully, enough to know he had not turned his back when his country needed him. In 1970, while the southern coast was still grappling with unhealed wounds of war, Marcus served as one of the communications officers aboard a reconnaissance ship operating near the Gulf. When soldiers were preparing for their first post-war peace festival, a symbol of hope and rebirth, he intercepted an unusual signal from a mysterious vessel. His warning was initially dismissed, yet, through sheer determination, he insisted on a thorough recheck. That insistence saved an entire region. The unmarked ship was not a stray fishing boat from a neighboring country. It carried explosives, intended to destroy a military supply depot near Rockshore's town center. Without his warning, more than 300 civilians and soldiers and a newly rebuilt infrastructure would have been wiped out in a single blast, with no time to react. But because of secrecy and political sensitivities at the time, the entire case remained classified. No media reports, no official thanks, only silence. And Marcus Rowe kept silent for decades. He never spoke of that night, not to family, not to neighbors, not to anyone. For in his heart, he believed a warrior did not need a medal to know he had stood and fought. But today, after mocking laughter, after camera lenses pointed at him as though he were a joke, after hundreds of indifferent faces that could not understand those faded photographs, something inside him sagged, not because he sought glory, not because his pride was wounded, but because he felt quietly and painfully that the most sacred chapter of his life, one he had believed would endure as long as he remembered it, had lost its value. It felt like the wooden box in his hand, old, worn, yet preserved by him day and night, only to be dismissed as a worthless trinket at a fair. He gazed once more at the sea, its surface dappled by fading light. The breeze ruffled his shirt, carrying the briny tang of the ocean and the indescribable sting of loneliness. He did not cry. Yet his hand tightened around the wooden box until it trembled. And then a single tear, no one knew from where, quietly fell onto the back of his hand. No sound, no witness, but to him it was proof that his heart still lived. The tear did not fall from pain, not from bitterness. It was regret, for a time when honor had been held as the highest value, for a time when people like him were heard, for a time when silence itself was a form of loyalty. And there, beneath the darkening sunset over Rockshore's waters, Marcus Rowe sat motionless. He no longer expected anyone to come. He no longer hoped anyone would understand. There remained only a man and a memory, waiting for the next wave to carry away the last fragment he held from his past. While the crowd remained engrossed by the lively performances on the main stage, a sudden announcement crackled over the harbor security's internal communication system. "Clear the harbor channels! Warships are approaching!" The command echoed like a blade tearing through the joyful atmosphere. There had been no warning, no mention in the festival schedule. Eyes went wide with bewilderment. Vendors froze mid-gesture. Tourists paused mid-step. No one understood what was unfolding. Then, from the deep blue horizon, dark silhouettes began to emerge, steel shadows surfacing from the ocean's depths. 3 escort vessels led the way, cleaving the waves like arrows shot into Rockshore Bay. Behind them followed a colossal destroyer, majestic and fierce, like a steel lion returning to the grounds it once guarded. The United States Navy flag snapped loudly in the wind, rising high on the mast like a resounding proclamation, piercing the hushed crowd. The Coast Guard sprang into action. Onlookers jostled to find vantage points. An aura of something sacred and unfamiliar swept over them. No one fully understood, yet no one left. On the deck of the destroyer, USS Valor, a man stood tall in his ivory-white uniform. Sunlight glinted off the insignia on his shoulders, 2 gold bars signifying a Navy colonel. Ethan Ward, the ship's commanding officer, clutched a small, red-waxed envelope sealed with the faint impression of the Pentagon's seal. His eyes never strayed from the land ahead. That land was his home, Rockshore, where his boyhood had been defined by the sound of the surf and the scent of rotting wood from old ships. 30 years earlier, Ethan had been a timid 9th-grade student, often an outcast because he couldn't take his eyes off books about radio waves and nautical charts. There was only one place where he felt heard, a small classroom at the town's community center, where an elderly man with silvery hair taught free lessons on signals, navigation, and the spirit of service. That man, none other than Marcus Rowe. Marcus had not only taught him how to read star maps, he had taught Ethan to listen for the unseen, the silence between signals, the courage in moments that seemed insignificant. When Ethan was accepted into the Naval Academy, it was Marcus who first wrote him a handwritten letter of congratulations. And now, aboard a warship bearing a name of honor, Ethan was returning, not as a student, but as a representative of a force once quietly saved by a single man. A horn blared as the USS Valor docked. Everything seemed to come to a standstill. Ethan disembarked, each step steady and resolute, his gaze unwavering. He did not veer toward the performance area or the festival reception. He walked straight to the central square, where the festival music abruptly ceased. The program coordinator froze in confusion. Before anyone could react, Ethan had stepped onto the stage steps. No microphone was needed, no invitation extended. He simply stood there, the envelope raised high. The crowd fell silent, as if the wind itself had stopped blowing. Every camera lens, every live streaming phone pivoted toward the man in uniform, none immediately recognizing who he was, only sensing his solemn bearing and daring not to interrupt. Ethan slowly broke the seal on the envelope. Inside lay a declassified document, a thick report bearing the official signatures of the Pentagon and the United States Navy. His voice rang out, calm yet unmistakably sincere. This report confirms that in July 1970, a terrorist threat targeted the armory in Rockshore. Had the attack succeeded, the entire town, and the festival grounds at that time, would have been reduced to a wasteland. The first person to detect the signal and issue the timely warning was Communications Officer Marcus Rowe himself. Yet, due to the operation's classified nature, the files remained sealed for more than 50 years. Today, in front of the townspeople, the Navy officially recognizes and thanks him. An explosion of emotion burst forth. The initial murmur of disbelief transformed into continuous applause. A few standing nearby tried to hide their embarrassment. There were faces that had just moments ago been mocking, now bowed in respect. In the back of the crowd stood an old man, silent. None other than Marcus. He said nothing. He stepped forward not a foot. He simply stood there, like an aged wooden post, still standing firm through countless storms. In his hand, the battered wooden box containing the Medal of Honor from long ago remained clutched, not for glory, but because the truth had finally come to light. On stage, Ethan scanned the crowd, his eyes searching for his former teacher. Their gazes locked in a moment that felt as though the world had paused. No words were required. No tears needed to fall. A simple nod between two servicemen of different generations, bound by the unspoken signal of gratitude. Rockshore had seen its share of stage lights, but today the brightest moment came from an old envelope and a truth once forgotten. And when the festival music resumed, it no longer sounded meaningless. It became the town's own symphony, finally acknowledging who they owed thanks to. Amid the lingering shock of the warship's arrival and the blare of loudspeakers, Ethan ascended the stage as though guided by something sacred. Sea breezes whistled through the stands, carrying the tang of salt and a sense of awe that enveloped the entire square. He stood silent for a few seconds, gazing directly at the crowd, once roaring for the vibrant performances, now hushed, as if they recognized they faced a truth too immense to ignore. In his hand, Ethan held high an envelope sealed with red wax, its edges worn and frayed. Without introduction or delay, he tore it open. His voice, amplified over the speakers, brought the entire festival to a halt. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone neither loud nor hesitant, with each word carving its mark into the still air. "The man some of you called an imposter, a cosplayer, a war actor, is the very person who saved this festival from obliteration in 1970. A wave of astonishment rippled through the square like surf crashing against cliffs. Live streaming phones snapped downward. Ethan raised a black and white photograph, young officers pulling an injured civilian aboard a ship, and at the center stood Marcus Rowe, eyes sharp as a blade, his gaze resolute, shoulders broad as the one who once faced mortal peril on the open sea. Not a charlatan, not an old man out of time, but the man who had held a town's fate in his hands. Thanks to Captain Marcus Rowe's warning, Ethan continued, never averting his eyes from the crowd, the Navy thwarted a bombing just hours before Rockshore's first post-war celebration. Without him, this town might not exist today. Silence fell. This silence was not merely an absence of sound. It was the void in people's hearts, the moment each of them confronted their own regret. The laughter and jibes from moments before, every mocking word, every scoffing smile now cut through their self-respect. Faces went pale, eyes darted in confusion, unsure where to look. Some bowed their heads, others stepped back, as though the distance between them and the veteran had become immeasurable. On stage, Ethan stepped down slowly, each footfall shedding the pomp of ceremony so he could draw nearer to the truth. He left the platform and walked straight toward a quiet corner, where Marcus still sat alone, his gaze fixed on the shimmering sea as if he had not fully returned from memory. Marcus did not look up as the crowd parted. He did not turn away from the glittering water. In his hand, the old wooden box remained clasped, etched by time and triumph. He expected nothing, awaited no acknowledgement, for his life's lesson had been to do what was right and move on, never looking back. Yet Ethan's footsteps did not falter. He halted before Marcus without a word, then knelt, removing his officer's cap in a gesture of respect. His voice, low and sincere, rose not for ears alone, but to fulfill a debt long overdue. "Sir," he said, "it is time Rockshore returned to you what has always been yours." Time seemed to stand still. The crowd silently closed in, forming a circle around the two men. No command issued, no instructions given, yet all knew they were witnessing something far more significant than any event they had ever attended. A collective act of atonement, a bow before one who had silently borne a pivotal moment in history. Marcus said nothing, but within eyes furrowed by storms and warfare, a fragile light flickered. No triumph, no pride, but the final gift veterans hope to receive: recognition. Sea breezes stirred Marcus's silver hair. Sunset light gilded the stones of the square. From the crowd, a little boy, perhaps too young to grasp the moment fully, quietly slipped from his mother's hand and approached the old man, placing on the table a small white seashell. No one instructed him to do so. Sometimes respect cannot be taught. It arises from what is right. Then, another hand rose in applause, and another. Soon, the whole square roared with genuine applause, from every direction, because everyone understood they were honoring a man who had lived truthfully, loved truly, and served without expectation of acclaim. Marcus Rowe said nothing, but he placed a hand gently on Ethan's shoulder, softly, like a sea breeze. And in that instant, past and present merged. No longer an old veteran mocked, but a soldier finally seen after more than half a century of silence. An impromptu ceremony of honor was held right in Rockshore's central square. Under a pale gray sky, the national flag was ceremoniously lowered in an almost absolute silence. A sea breeze stirred, carrying the briny scent of salt and something sacred. As the flag was raised again, every eye turned to the newly added black and gold mourning band, an emblem never mentioned in ordinary protocols. It was a symbol of gratitude, remembrance, and reverence for silent sacrifices. Thousands of attendees stood shoulder to shoulder, motionless, as if time itself had stopped. No music played, no vendors shouted out their wares. All focus was on the dais, where Marcus Rowe, hair silvered, body lean, eyes still bright, stood beside Ethan Ward. The breeze coaxed the ribbon on his chest to flutter gently, like a silent heartbeat newly acknowledged. The mayor of Rockshore ascended the platform, his voice low but charged with feeling. In his hand was a wooden box engraved with Marcus's name. With solemn words, he declared that the central square, once the site of countless parades, would be renamed Marcus Rowe Square. A place meant not just to remember one man's deeds, but to stand as a living monument to loyalty, humility, and unconditional service. Immediately afterward, a proclamation from the Navy fleet was read aloud. The Navy pledged to sponsor Rockshore's summer festival for the next 10 years, part of a collective tribute to the community that had produced a silent hero. That pledge was more than material support. It was a belated apology from a system that had once forgotten a deserving man. A murmur spread through the crowd, not out of surprise, but because years of suppressed emotion were finally finding release. Rockshore's elders recalled 1970, remembered the first post-war festival, and how everyone's lives were saved by an anonymous warning. Now, that forgotten name stood at the very heart of their town, in both word and spirit. Ethan stepped to Marcus's side, holding a small box. Inside was a gold-plated replica of the long-forgotten medal. Along its lower edge, a simple but profound inscription gleamed in the sunlight. For courage, needing no spotlight. No fanfare, no extravagance, just the truth at last acknowledged. Marcus accepted it slowly, not with eager hands, but with a deliberate, reverent gesture. His hand trembled, not out of weakness, but because his aging heart surged at that same urgent call of duty he had heard decades ago. He looked down at the medal, then lifted his gaze to the crowd. Once strangers, once indifferent, even once mocking, now rising to applaud. No instruction was needed. They all stood in unison, as though partaking in an unspoken rite known to the entire town. He spoke little. He had never needed many words to be understood. A single nod, which carried a decade's worth of memories, was enough. Those were the hours spent in the signals room amid a raging storm, the sleepless nights over decisions never spoken aloud, the solitary Tet holidays in a small beachfront cottage, watching fireworks and yearning for the glow of a distant red beacon. A single tear trailed down his weathered face, not one of pain or resentment, but of release, the relief that his sacrifices would no longer be buried, the relief that he no longer had to guard a story he had been too afraid to tell. In that square, those who had mocked him that morning now stood beside each other, silent, some placing hands over their hearts, a rare gesture of respect. Children, previously engrossed in their phones, looked up at the stage with puzzled awe and newfound reverence. The same cameras that had mocked now recorded history. The ceremony ended with no fireworks, no grand musical finale, only the gentle roar of the surf against the shore, whispering through time, "We remember you, and we thank you." Marcus raised his head, not because he had been awarded a medal, but because after so many years in silence, he could finally meet the eyes of his townspeople and see something he thought lost. acknowledgement. Not for acclaim, but because, as he always believed, only when truth is illuminated can future generations learn what honor truly means, and what it means to serve without expecting applause. As he stepped from the stage, every footfall measured and steady, the entire square seemed to part for him. No one spoke, yet every gaze he passed seemed to say, "We are sorry, and we thank you." And for Marcus Rowe, who had lived quietly by the sea, that moment was the greatest reward. To witness truth rekindled, to feel gratitude bloom from a town that had once forgotten him. From that day forward, in Rockshore's central square, a new stone monument was erected. Not ornate, not gilded, just a gray slab of granite, standing quietly against the sea breeze, yet etched with an image impossible to forget. Marcus Rowe, in his old uniform, gaze fixed upon the ocean, and behind him a sail billowed full, pointing toward the horizon. Beneath, a simple line of text weighed like 1,000 tons. Sometimes, the person who saved an entire town sits quietly in a corner. Each day, school children are led to the square, lining up respectfully before the memorial. They stand in silence, listening intently to stories of long ago, not from textbooks, but from the townspeople themselves, the witnesses to a memory once forgotten. The adults who once passed Marcus by now bow their heads, placing a single flower at the monument's base, as if to offer a belated apology. And every summer, the Rockshore Festival still unfolds. There is still music. There are still parades. There are still brilliant lights. But amid it all, there comes a moment of hush, when everyone turns toward the stone, to honor the man who was once mocked, once deemed unknown, yet who kept the town safe from the shadows. Marcus Rowe did not need a monument to be remembered, but his silence stirred countless hearts. If you believe respect does not come from applause, but from truth acknowledged, then this story is for you. Share it. And if you wish to hear more such tales, where every soul once silent is illuminated by gratitude, please subscribe to the Veteran Best Stories channel. For there are heroes who need no cameras, they only need to be heard once.